The sun hung low over the Texas desert, casting long shadows across the dry, cracked earth. The scent of fresh produce mixed with the faint aroma of dust as Sarah Carter arranged the last of her tomatoes on the wooden stall. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent years in disciplined environments. Every motion was deliberate, controlled. Bravo and Rex, her two German shepherds, patrolled the perimeter of the farm stand with the same silent vigilance they had honed in their past lives. To most, they were just well-trained dogs, protective but obedient. To Sarah, they were more than that. They were war dogs, retired soldiers, just like her. A black SUV rolled past slowly, its tinted windows concealing its occupants. It wasn't the first time Sarah had noticed the vehicle this week. The way it lingered, the way it moved just a little too deliberately, it all set off alarm bells in the back of her mind. She didn't react outwardly, but she felt Bravo and Rex stiffen beside her, their ears perked forward, bodies tense like coiled springs. They felt it too. Before she could dwell on it, a cloud of dust signaled the arrival of another vehicle. A rusted blue pickup truck pulled into the gravel lot, and Samuel Price stepped out. The old rancher, his face weathered from years under the Texas sun, moved with a quiet confidence. His 8-year-old granddaughter, Lily, bounced out of the passenger seat, her blonde curls glowing in the afternoon light. "Careful there, sweetheart," Sarah called out as Lily rushed toward the stand. Lily's face lit up as she dug into her pocket and pulled out two homemade dog treats. "Can I give Bravo and Rex their snacks, Miss Sarah?" "Of course, honey," Sarah said, keeping one eye on the SUV as it disappeared around the bend. The dogs, despite their alertness, softened when Lily approached. They accepted the treats with gentle precision, their sharp eyes never leaving the road. Samuel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Saw that black SUV again?" Sarah nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "That's the third time this week. Different plates, but same vehicle." "Cartel," Samuel muttered, his jaw tightening. "They've been creeping up this way, taking over small businesses, using them as fronts. You're in a prime spot for their operations." Sarah exhaled slowly. She knew exactly what kind of men they were dealing with. She had spent years facing their type in war zones overseas. This wasn't just a business takeover, it was a slow invasion. Before she could respond, the low rumble of an approaching engine made them both turn. A police cruiser pulled up, and James Hunter stepped out. The sheriff's uniform did little to hide the hardened military stance he carried. Once a Marine, always a Marine. "Afternoon, Sarah," James greeted, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Saw the SUV?" "Yeah," she confirmed. "Same one." James sighed, rubbing a hand over his stubbled jaw. "They're pushing north. Hit the Martinez place to towns over last night. Family's too scared to talk, but we both know what that means. They're testing the waters," Sarah murmured, "seeing how much they can take before someone pushes back." James nodded. "I put in some calls to Border Patrol ND, but they're stretched thin. If this escalates, we might be on our own for a while." Sarah's hand instinctively dropped to Bravo's head, her fingers feeling the rigid muscles beneath thick fur. "That's fine," she said quietly. "We've handled worse." James gave her a knowing look. "You thinking of fighting back?" Sarah's lips curved into a small, humorless smile. "They think I'm just a woman selling vegetables with a couple of dogs. Let's see how long they keep underestimating me." As if sensing her resolve, Bravo and Rex let out a low, rumbling growl, their bodies poised, ready. From the road, the black SUV reappeared, this time moving even slower. Sarah's sharp eyes caught a brief glimpse through the window, 3 men inside, watching, calculating. She wiped her hands on a rag and turned to Samuel. "Lily should head inside now." Samuel didn't argue. He called for his granddaughter, his grip tightening protectively around her tiny hand. James rested a hand on the holster at his hip. "They're getting bold." Sarah's gaze never wavered from the SUV as it finally disappeared over the horizon. "Good," she said, voice firm. "That means they're getting sloppy." Bravo and Rex stood at her sides, muscles tense, waiting for her command. Sarah inhaled deeply, eyes scanning the desert beyond. She had spent her whole life fighting battles on foreign soil. This time, the battlefield was her home, and she wasn't about to lose it. The sun had barely begun to set when Sarah Carter locked up the farm stand for the evening. The desert air cooled slightly, though the heat of the day still lingered in waves over the gravel driveway. Bravo and Rex moved in coordinated patrols, their bodies flowing with disciplined precision as they swept the perimeter. Years of training had ingrained in them an instinct that never faded, not even in the safety of this quiet town. But safety, Sarah knew, was an illusion. She walked toward the modest house behind the stand, her boots crunching against the dry earth. Inside, she poured herself a cup of coffee, glancing at the wall where an old, folded American flag hung above her fireplace. Next to it, a shelf held faded photographs, some of her in uniform, others of the dogs she had trained for war. Some of them never made it back. She wasn't just a farmer. She never had been. Sarah Carter had spent 15 years in the military as a canine handler, training elite war dogs for high-risk missions in Afghanistan and Iraq. She had seen firsthand what these animals could do, sniffing out explosives before they could rip through a convoy, tracking down insurgents in the dead of night. Bravo and Rex had served beside her, had saved her life more times than she could count. And now, here they were, thousands of miles away from the battlefield, but still prepared for war. A sharp knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Sheriff James Hunter standing on her porch, his usual serious expression even more grim than usual. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. Sarah stepped aside, motioning toward the kitchen table. "Coffee?" James shook his head. "No time." He took a seat, fingers tapping against the wooden surface as he exhaled heavily. "You and I both know what's coming, Sarah. These cartel guys. They're not just passing through. They're expanding." Sarah leaned against the counter, arms crossed. And they'll come for you. This farm stand, this land, you're in the perfect position for their operations. They'll want to use it. If you refuse, they'll push harder." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Let them push." James studied her carefully. "You still think like a soldier. That's good. But you're one person, Sarah. Even with those dogs, you can't fight a war alone." She let out a small chuckle, shaking her head. "I've never been alone." As if on cue, Bravo and Rex appeared in the doorway, their dark eyes locked onto James, their presence unmistakably protective. James sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I put in some calls. Carlos Mendes might be able to help." Sarah arched a brow. "The vet," James smirked. "Not just a vet. Carlos was Army intelligence before he started patching up ranch dogs. He's got contacts, people who can get us intel." Sarah took a slow sip of coffee. She had known Carlos for years but had never asked too many questions about his past. Now, it made sense. "What about Samuel?" she asked. James nodded. "He's in. You know, he was a ranger before he took over his dad's ranch. He's got some friends too, ex-military guys who don't take kindly to cartel scum." Sarah exhaled, setting her cup down. "So, we've got a sheriff, a vet with intel, a rancher with a few buddies, and me. And 2 war dogs," James added. Sarah looked at Bravo and Rex, who sat attentively, waiting for her next move. She gave James a determined look. "Then we're not outnumbered." "They are." Sarah Carter had been through enough deployments to recognize a battle before it started. The cartel wasn't just watching anymore, they were probing, testing her reaction, looking for weaknesses. And she had none. 3 days had passed since the black SUV first appeared. Now, she counted 2 more vehicles, one parked down the road, another making slow passes in front of her farm stand. The men inside never got out, never approached. But their intent was clear. They were waiting. The first confrontation, it was nearly sunset when the first move came. Sarah was finishing up for the day, stacking empty crates when she heard Bravo's warning growl. Rex was already moving toward the road, ears pinned forward, muscles coiled like a spring. Then she saw another SUV, but this time, it didn't just pass by. It pulled into her lot. 2 men stepped out. They weren't locals. Their boots were too clean, their posture too confident, the kind of confidence that came from carrying a gun. Sarah didn't move from where she stood, but Bravo and Rex did. They flanked her, their bodies tense, eyes locked onto the strangers. One of the men, tall and lean with slicked-back black hair, smiled as he approached. "Miss Carter," he greeted, his voice smooth. "I was hoping we could talk." Sarah didn't blink. "You're trespassing." The man let out a chuckle. "Just stopping by to admire your operation. Beautiful land. Quiet. Perfect for a business like ours." She didn't respond. The man's smile faded slightly. "We're making some acquisitions in the area. You seem like a smart woman. You know how things work. Sarah's fingers twitched slightly, but her voice remained steady. I know exactly how things work. You threaten the small businesses, squeeze them until they give in. You take over their property, use it for your operations. But I don't scare easily. The man sighed, shaking his head. That's unfortunate, because fear is what keeps people safe. If you won't cooperate, things might become complicated. Rex took a slow step forward, a deep, guttural growl vibrating in his throat. Bravo mirrored the movement, positioning himself between Sarah and the second man, who had started reaching into his jacket. The taller man raised a hand. Easy now. No need for things to get ugly. Sarah's expression remained cold. They only get ugly if you stay. For a moment, the two sides stared each other down. Then the man smiled again, but this time, it didn't reach his eyes. We'll be seeing you again, Miss Carter. They turned, walking back to their SUV. As soon as the engine started, Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed. James picked up on the first ring. Tell me you didn't shoot them. Not yet, she said flatly. But it's coming. The warning signs me the next morning. Things had escalated. Samuel Price called just after dawn. Sarah, you need to get out here. She arrived at his ranch within 15 minutes. What she saw made her stomach twist. His cattle were dead, dozens of them, their bodies lying across the field, their throats slit. A message, carved into one of the wooden fence posts, leave or die. Sarah clenched her jaw. Samuel stood beside her, his face dark with restrained fury. They poisoned 2 of my dogs, he muttered. Didn't get to the others. But this is a declaration of war. Sarah ran a hand over Bravo's head. She could feel the tension in him, the way he picked up on her anger. This doesn't end with threats, she said quietly. They want blood. Samuel nodded. Then we give it to them. The final push night. Sarah didn't sleep. Neither did Bravo or Rex. They waited. At exactly 2:00 a.m., the sound of tires on gravel cut through the silence. Then footsteps. Sarah was already up, rifle in hand, as Bravo and Rex slipped into the shadows, moving like ghosts. Through the window, she saw them 5 men, dressed in black, moving toward the farm stand. They were armed. She exhaled slowly, steadied her aim, and whispered, "Showtime." Sarah Carter had spent most of her life preparing for fights she never wanted but always knew would come. This was no different. As the 5 intruders moved toward her farm stand, Sarah stayed perfectly still, her breath slow and controlled. Bravo and Rex had already vanished into the darkness, their training taking over. They weren't barking. War dogs didn't waste noise on warnings. They struck first. She counted the men, 3 moving toward the back of the stand, 2 heading for the front door. Amateurs, she thought. They weren't trained operators. They relied on intimidation, expecting an easy target. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Sarah steadied her rifle, took a slow inhale, and fired. The first shot shattered the silence, hitting the nearest man square in the knee. He collapsed with a scream, clutching his leg. The others froze, momentarily stunned. Then Bravo and Rex attacked. The darkness exploded with movement as the 2 war dogs emerged from the shadows like ghosts. Bravo lunged at one of the front attackers, teeth sinking into his arm before dragging him to the ground. Rex went for another, knocking him off balance before snapping his jaws around the man's wrist. The remaining 3 panicked, scrambling for cover. One of them fired wildly into the night. Sarah ducked, keeping her aim steady as she fired another shot, clipping the shoulder of a second intruder. Then, headlights flooded the field. A truck skidded to a stop, dust billowing into the air. The passenger door flew open, and James Hunter stepped out, his pistol already raised. Behind him, Samuel Price emerged, rifle in hand. "Drop your weapons," James barked. The remaining cartel men hesitated, their faces contorted with fear and rage. But they weren't stupid. Outnumbered, injured, and with 2 war dogs ready to tear them apart, they slowly lowered their guns. Samuel stepped forward, pressing his boot against the chest of the man Sarah had shot in the leg. "You're gonna deliver a message for us," he said coldly. "Tell your boss that this town isn't for sale." James pulled out his radio. "I'll handle the rests. Sarah, you need to get ready. This isn't over." Sarah nodded, already knowing what came next. This was just the first wave. The real fight was still ahead. fortifying the farm beyond dawn. Sarah's farm had transformed into something else entirely. Samuel had brought in 3 other ranchers, men who had served in the military before returning to quiet lives. Now, they were back in action, setting up defenses like it was a forward operating base. They reinforced the doors and windows, set up motion sensors, and mapped out possible entry points. Sarah dug out her old military gear, night vision goggles, extra ammunition, and, most importantly, the reinforced tactical vests she had kept for Bravo and Rex. James had called in favors. Carlos Mendes, the veterinarian with a past in Army intelligence, had compiled a full report on the cartel's movements. They're regrouping, he told them. After last night, they know you're not an easy target. That means they'll either back off or come at you harder. They won't back off, Sarah said. Carlos nodded grimly. Then we need to be ready. Final preparations as the sun set. Sarah stood outside her farm, watching Bravo and Rex complete their patrol. James approached, arms crossed. You sure about this? Sarah glanced at him. I was trained for this. He sighed. Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. She smirked, patting Bravo's head. Then you don't know me well enough. Inside, the radio crackled. Samuel's voice came through. They're coming. Sarah inhaled deeply, her grip tightening around her rifle. Then let's finish this. The night was unnervingly quiet. Too quiet. Sarah Carter had learned long ago that silence was never a good sign. It meant something was coming. She stood at the edge of her porch, rifle in hand, scanning the darkness beyond her property. The cool night breeze rustled the dry grass, but it did little to ease the tension in her muscles. Bravo and Rex were already on high alert, their bodies low to the ground, ears twitching at every faint noise. Then, it happened. The distant rumble of approaching vehicles. Sarah exhaled slowly, steadying herself. She could feel the weight of what was about to unfold. There was no turning back now. The first vehicle came into view, a black pickup truck with its headlights off, followed by 2 more SUVs. They stopped just outside the property line, their engines idling. Then, the doors opened. 6 men stepped out, their silhouettes barely visible against the night. They moved with cautious purpose, their hands hovering near their weapons. These weren't the reckless street thugs from before. These men were professionals. Sarah tightened her grip on her rifle. Through her earpiece, James Hunter's voice came through. We see them. Stand by. From his position near the barn, Samuel Price whispered, they're spreading out. Looks like to our flanking left. Sarah didn't answer. She was already moving, slipping into the shadows beside the house, her rifle trained on the nearest target. Then, one of the men called out, Miss Carter. A voice rang through the darkness. We don't have to do this the hard way. Sarah smirked. Then you should have stayed home. The men chuckled. That's a shame. Then gunfire. Sarah fired first, dropping one of the cartel men before he could even raise his weapon. The others scattered, returning fire as they dove for cover. Bravo and Rex sprang into action. Bravo tore through the darkness, taking down the man who had been flanking left. The attacker barely had time to react before the war dog's teeth sank into his forearm, twisting him to the ground with brutal efficiency. Rex was just as fast, lunging at another cartel soldier, knocking him off balance before delivering a bone-crushing bite to his leg. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Sarah took cover behind an old wooden crate, reloading as bullets splintered the wood beside her. She could hear Samuel returning fire from the barn, while James coordinated from his position near the truck. This wasn't just a fight. This was war. The air reeked of gunpowder and adrenaline. Sarah moved with precision, her years of training kicking in as she fired another round, striking a cartel soldier in the shoulder. He stumbled back with a curse, but before he could recover, Bravo lunged at him, teeth sinking into his wrist, forcing him to drop his weapon. The man screamed, struggling against the war dog's unyielding grip, but Bravo had been trained for this. He wasn't letting go. Rex was just as relentless. The massive German Shepherd darted through the chaos, weaving between bursts of gunfire as he targeted another enemy. The cartel soldier barely had time to react before Rex knocked him to the ground, his powerful jaws clamping around the man's calf. He shrieked in agony, dropping his pistol as Rex tightened his grip, ensuring he wouldn't be getting up anytime soon. Sarah didn't hesitate. She shifted position, using the brief distraction to her advantage. From her left, She heard Samuel's rifle crack as he took out one of the gunmen attempting to retreat. "Sit down," he muttered through the radio. James's voice came in next. "Watch the right flank. They're regrouping." Sarah turned just in time to see two cartel enforcers using the truck for cover, trying to set up a counterattack. She exhaled slowly, adjusted her aim, and fired. One bullet found its mark, striking the nearest man in the thigh. He crumpled, clutching his leg, while his partner ducked lower, spraying blind shots towards Sarah's position. She ducked just as bullets slammed into the wooden crates beside her, sending splinters flying. A split second later, Rex launched forward, his powerful form cutting through the darkness. The cartel soldier didn't even see him coming until it was too late. Rex tackled him to the ground, knocking the air from his lungs before delivering a crushing bite to his arm. James moved in swiftly, securing the wounded enemies while Samuel covered him. The remaining cartel men, realizing they were outmatched, scrambled toward their vehicles in a desperate attempt to escape. Sarah aimed at the last man standing, but before she could pull the trigger, Bravo let out a deep, warning growl. She hesitated. This one wasn't reaching for a gun, he was reaching for something else. A phone. He pressed a button. A signal. Then he smirked at her through bloody teeth. "You think this is over?" he rasped. Sarah's stomach clenched. They had just sent a message. And someone was coming. The battlefield had fallen silent. The last cartel soldier groaned in pain, clutching his bleeding leg as James Hunter secured him with a pair of zip ties. Samuel Price reloaded his rifle, scanning the area for any remaining threats. Bravo and Rex stood guard over the downed men, their ears twitching, their breathing controlled. They weren't celebrating victory, they were waiting for the next fight. Sarah Carter wiped a streak of dirt from her cheek, exhaling slowly. They had won this round, but something felt wrong. Too easy. Then she saw headlights. Farther down the road, a convoy of vehicles approached. Not the reckless, chaotic rival of cartel foot soldiers, but something more disciplined. 3 armored SUVs, their engines purring like predators in the dark. Sarah's grip on her rifle tightened. "James," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I see it," the sheriff muttered. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "This isn't like the others." The SUVs came to a slow, deliberate stop just outside the property line. No one got out at first. The doors remained closed, they are thick with anticipation. Then, after a long, tense moment, the back door of the lead vehicle opened, and he stepped out. Al Lobo. Sarah had never met him before, but she knew exactly who he was. The true power behind the cartel's expansion. The man whose name alone sent waves of fear through border towns. Unlike his subordinates, he didn't wear cheap leather jackets or flashy gold chains. He was dressed in a fitted black tactical vest over a dark shirt, military-style cargo pants, and gloves that looked well worn from use. Every movement was measured, every step precise. This wasn't some drug lord playing gangster. This was a soldier. Al Lobo, James muttered under his breath. Damn it. Sarah remained still as the men approached. He wasn't armed, at least not visibly, but he didn't need a weapon to command control. The way his men moved, the disciplined formation they held, told her everything she needed to know. This was different. This was war. Al Lobo stopped a few feet away, his dark eyes settling on Sarah with curiosity. Then he smiled. It wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile a wolf gave before deciding whether the prey was worth chasing. "Miss Carter," he said smoothly. "You've been busy." Sarah didn't answer. He glanced at the wounded cartel men scattered around the property, some groaning in pain, others unconscious. He let out a low chuckle. Impressive. Still, Sarah didn't respond. She wasn't going to play his game. Al Lobo tilted his head slightly. "I'll admit, I underestimated you. My mistake." His eyes flickered toward Bravo and Rex, who stood rigid, their bodies tensed, their teeth slightly bared. "And the dogs, they are well trained." Sarah finally spoke. "They've survived worse than you." Al Lobo smirked. "So I've heard." He took a slow step forward. The tension among Sarah's group spiked, but she held up a hand, signaling them to stay put. "I didn't come here to fight," he continued. "Not yet." He clasped his hands behind his back. "I came to make you an offer." Sarah arched a brow but said nothing. "You've proven yourself," Al Lobo said. "You're capable, strategic, disciplined. People like you. They don't belong on some dusty farm stand." They belong in places of power. Sarah scoffed. Let me guess you want me to work for you. Al Lobo smiled again. Not for me. With me. Silence stretched between them. The weight of his words settled over the battlefield like a fog. Then Sarah spoke, her voice steady. You should have done your research. Al Lobo's smile faded slightly. Oh, I did. Sarah met his gaze, and flinching. Then you know I don't take orders. And I don't work with men who think fear is power. Al Lobo's expression remained unreadable for a moment. Then, after a long pause, he exhaled, shaking his head. That's a shame. He turned slightly, motioning to his men. One of them opened a briefcase, revealing stacks of neatly arranged cash. Another held up a satellite phone. Last chance, Al Lobo said. The money is yours. The power is yours. Say yes. And this war ends before it begins. Sarah didn't even glance at the money. She reached down, resting a hand on Bravo's head. Go to hell. For the first time, Al Lobo's smile disappeared completely. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. Then it begins. He turned, walking back toward his SUV. His men followed, closing the doors behind him. The convoy started its engines, the deep growl of the vehicles sending a final and spoken warning into the air. Sarah didn't move until the last set of taillights disappeared down the road. James let out a breath. Well, we're in it now. Sarah looked toward the horizon, where the dust from El Lobo's departure still lingered in the night. We always were. The wind howled across the open desert, carrying with it the weight of an impending storm, not one of nature, but of war. Sarah Carter stood at her kitchen table, a large map of the area spread out in front of her. The dim glow of an oil lamp flickered against the walls, casting long shadows over the gathered group. James Hunter leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his expression grim. Samuel Price sat across from Sarah, cleaning his rifle with practiced precision. Carlos Mendes was reviewing a file of intelligence reports, his sharp eyes scanning each page with methodical patience. And in the corner, Bravo and Rex lay still but alert, their ears twitching at the slightest sound. No one spoke for a moment. They all knew what was coming. Sarah was the first to break the silence. Al Lobo isn't walking away from this. He's seen what we can do. He won't make the same mistakes twice. James exhaled through his nose. Which means he's coming back with everything he's got. Carlos set the folder down. My contacts say he's calling in reinforcements, mercenaries, not just cartel foot soldiers. These guys will be ex-military, private contractors, men who know how to fight. He's not playing games anymore. Samuel didn't look up from his rifle. Neither are we. Sarah studied the map. If he's bringing professionals, that means they'll follow structure. They'll set up a perimeter, cut off escape routes, and control key positions before they move in. James nodded. They'll turn the town into a battlefield. Sarah traced her finger along the map, marking key points. Then we make sure the battlefield works for us. She looked up at the group. We don't have the numbers to take them head on. So, we don't. We hit them where they're weakest. We control the terrain, disrupt their supply lines, and force them to fight blind. Carlos smirked. Guerrilla tactics. Smart. Sarah nodded. We turn the town into a maze. We booby-trap the main roads, funnel them into kill zones. We cut off their communication, jam their radios, and take away their night vision advantage. Samuel grinned. Now you're talking. James exhaled, rubbing his temples. You know this means there's no going back, right? Sarah locked eyes with him. There was never going to be. Setting the trap over the next 12 hours, they worked. Samuel and his rancher friends fortified key buildings, reinforcing walls and setting up sniper nests. James coordinated with the few deputies he could trust, making sure civilians were quietly evacuated from potential danger zones. Carlos handled the logistics, securing supplies, rigging old radio towers to disrupt enemy frequencies, and setting up a hidden medical station for inevitable casualties. Sarah, meanwhile, trained Bravo and Rex for the fight ahead. Under the dim glow of moonlight, she ran drills with them, silent movement exercises, attack maneuvers, retrieval commands. They moved like ghosts, disappearing and reappearing in the darkness, their war instincts sharper than ever. As dawn approached, the team regrouped at Sarah's farm. Samuel tightened the strap on his rifle. How long do we have? Carlos checked his watch. Not long. James pulled out his pistol, chambering around. Then let's welcome them properly. Sarah looked toward the horizon, the rising sun casting a golden glow over the desert. Let's end this. The first sign of the attack came just after sunset. Sarah Carter crouched behind the barricaded farm stand, her rifle steady, eyes locked on the distant headlights that appeared on the horizon. The convoy approached in perfect formation, military precision, just as she expected. 3 armored SUVs in front, followed by a line of black pickup trucks carrying armed men. They weren't just here to intimidate. They were here to eliminate. Through her earpiece, James Hunter's voice came in. They're moving fast. At least 20 hostiles, all heavily armed. Carlos Mendes, stationed near the water tower, added, "They're not being subtle. This is a full assault." Sarah exhaled slowly. Good. That means they're walking right into our trap. She signaled to Samuel Price, who was hidden in a sniper's nest above the barn. He adjusted his rifle, waiting for the perfect moment. Bravo and Rex were already in position, lurking in the shadows, their bodies tense with anticipation. They knew what was coming. The first vehicle reached the property line. Then, Sarah gave the signal. A deafening boom shattered the night as the lead SUV hit the first tripwire. The explosion flipped the vehicle onto its side, sending flames into the air. Panic erupted in the convoy as the other vehicles swerved, trying to avoid the burning wreckage. That was when Samuel took his first shot. The sharp crack of his rifle echoed through the night as one of the cartel's men dropped instantly. Another shot followed, then another. Chaos spread through their ranks as they scrambled for cover, firing blindly into the darkness. Sarah took her chance. She rose from her position, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck a gunman square in the chest, sending him collapsing to the ground. James and his deputies opened fire from their flanking positions, pinning the cartel forces between a hail of bullets. The cartel had numbers, but they had no control. Their well-organized approach had turned into pure survival. Then, Bravo and Rex attacked. They moved like shadows, slipping between gunfire and striking fast. Bravo lunged at a man reloading his rifle, knocking him to the ground with bone-crushing force. Rex took down another, his powerful jaws locking onto the man's wrist, forcing him to drop his weapon. The battle had begun, and Sarah was ready to finish it. Gunfire roared across the farm, the muzzle flashes illuminating the battlefield in bursts of orange and white. Sarah Carter ducked behind cover as bullets chewed through the wooden crates beside her. She reloaded quickly, her movements precise, controlled. Years of combat training had drilled one thing into her: stay calm, stay alive. Across the yard, Samuel Price kept firing from his elevated position, each shot hitting its mark. James and his deputies moved tactically, shifting positions to keep the cartel forces disoriented. The attackers had expected an easy takeover, but they were the ones being hunted now. Then, Sarah spotted Himel Lobo. He stood near one of the SUVs, barking orders, his dark eyes scanning the chaos with lethal calculation. He wasn't panicked. He was adapting. And that made him dangerous. Sarah steadied her aim, lining up her shot. But before she could squeeze the trigger, a powerful explosion erupted behind her. The cartel had breached the barn. Smoke and fire billowed into the night, and Sarah's radio crackled with Samuel's voice. "They've got reinforcements coming in from the east. Damn it." She switched focus, moving quickly toward the barn's rear entrance. 2 cartel soldiers were making their way inside, rifles raised. Before they could react, Bravo and Rex struck. Bravo clamped down on one man's leg, dragging him down with a guttural snarl. Rex tackled the second, sending him sprawling before sinking his teeth into his shoulder. The screams were drowned out by more gunfire. Sarah pushed forward, firing at another cartel gunman trying to climb into the loft. He crumpled instantly. She had no time to think, only react. Years of war had taught her that battles weren't won by brute force alone, they were won by strategy, by endurance. Then, the radio crackled again. James's voice, tight with urgency. "Sarah, Al Lobo is making a move, he's heading your way." She spun, scanning the battlefield, and then she saw him, walking toward her through the smoke. Unlike his men, he wasn't rushing. He was composed, a predator sizing up his prey. In his hand, he held a sleek pistol, the kind used by professionals. Sarah tightened her grip on her rifle. For a moment, everything else faded. The gunfire, the shouting, the chaos. It was just her and him. Al Lobo smirked. Let's see if you're as good as they say. Sarah exhaled, steadying herself. Let's find out. The final confrontation had begun. The battlefield had shrunk to just two people. Smoke curled in the air, the scent of burning wood mixing with the metallic tang of blood and gunpowder. Sarah Carter kept her rifle raised, her heartbeat steady despite the chaos around her. Across from her, Al Lobo stood with his pistol, an knowing smirk playing at the corner of his lips. You're impressive, he admitted, tilting his head slightly. You think like a soldier. Move like one. Fight like one. Sarah didn't reply. She had no interest in his words. Al Lobo exhaled, lowering his pistol slightly. We don't have to do this, you know. You've already won the battle. You could let me walk away. Sarah scoffed. So you can come back stronger. I don't think so. Al Lobo's smirk widened. Then let's finish this. He moved first, lightning fast, raising his pistol to fire. But Sarah was faster. She dropped to one knee, squeezing the trigger. Her bullet struck true right in his shoulder. The force spun him around, his gun clattering to the ground as he let out a pained grunt. But he wasn't done yet. With a surprising burst of strength, he lunged at her, knocking her rifle aside. The two crashed onto the dirt, grappling for control. Al Lobo was strong, but Sarah was trained. She twisted, using his momentum against him, flipping him onto his back. Before he could react, she drove her elbow into his jaw, stunning him. Bravo and Rex were there in an instant, growling, teeth bared, ready to strike. Sarah didn't give him the chance to recover. She grabbed his fallen pistol, pressing it against his forehead. It's over. Al Lobo stared up at her, breathing heavily. Then, unexpectedly, he grinned. You're good, Carter. But killing me won't end this. Sarah's finger hovered over the trigger. She wanted to end it, to make sure he never came back. But something held her back. A distant siren wailed. Reinforcements. James's voice crackled through her radio. Sarah, we've got D&D Border Patrol incoming. Stand down. Sarah exhaled sharply. She wasn't a murderer. Not today. She pulled back, standing as James and his deputies stormed in, weapons raised. Take him, she ordered. James nodded, securing Al Lobo in cuffs. It's done. Around them, the cartel forces had been subdued. The surviving gunmen were either fleeing or being rounded up. Samuel approached, wiping sweat and dirt from his face. Hell of a night, he muttered. Carlos joined them, shaking his head. They won't recover from this. You crippled them. Sarah glanced at the sky. The first hints of dawn peeked over the horizon, painting the desert in gold and crimson. It was over. Or so she thought. As the cartel prisoners were loaded into patrol cars, James approached Sarah, his expression serious. You should hear this. He handed her a confiscated radio. Static crackled before a voice came through. Deep, commanding. Al Lobo has fallen. Initiate phase 2. Sarah's blood ran cold. She met James's gaze. This isn't over. He nodded grimly. No. It's just beginning. Bravo and Rex stood by her side, ready. The war was far from finished, and Sarah Carter would be ready for whatever came next.